It's a pleasure to invite Anne to speak to us today. No one's more expert than Anne about how to get onto neonatal grid, I'm sure, and how to get the experience and navigate the new processes with Shaper training. So thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Callie. I'm sorry, I don't have any slides. My excuse is that I'm actually on leave, and so I'm sort of being kind to myself, and so I'm going to wing it a little. So first of all, I'm going to do something that we were talking about just yesterday. I'm going to encourage us to stop using the term grid. So this is neonatal subspecialty training. We're trying to remember yesterday how the term grid came about, and we can't remember. We don't even know what it stands for. I put in grid training into Google and came up with nothing relating to medicine. So it's subspecialty training. It's neonatal subspecialty training, and the head of our CSAC will talk a little bit about neonatal subspecialty training. But we know that it is essentially an indicative 3-year training program in level 3, the current level 3. And obviously you all know what neonatology is all about. That's why you've all logged on here. We are in London, quite fortunate to have quite a lot of grid training centres, subspecialty training centres. Even I have to stop. Every time I think I say that, I'm going to put £1 into a jar. This is like a swear word now. So we have 8 tertiary centres, and then if we include Great Ormond Street Hospital, that now does offer subspecialty, neonatal subspecialty training. We have 9 subspecialty training centres. We have a significant number of training posts that are designated for subspecialty training within those centres. Not all the posts are, because neonatal care is intrinsically delivered not just by subspecialists, but by doctors who have got interest in neonatology, and doctors who undertake neonatal cover as part of their general pediatric work. So all trainees, in London, we encourage all trainees who are not subspecialty trainees in other subspecialties to undertake a minimum of 6 months full-time equivalent of neonates in their tertiary centre in their level 3 training. So we have we try to have about 3 trainees, subspecialty trainees per centre, sometimes 2. The bigger centres will have up to 3 if they've got big surgical presence, for instance, so that we ensure that the trainees that are allocated there have access to good training. The curriculum is set by the CSAC, and we ensure that all training centres adhere to providing curricular requirements of the posts of the training program. So it is a competitive subspecialty. It's a very well liked subspecialty, and why shouldn't it be? It's an exciting subspecialty. I say we're what is it? Jack of all trades and master of all, not master of none, because we're endocrinologists, we're gastroenterologists, we're nephrologists, we deal with all aspects of the baby's care. We might get in the other subspecialties once in a while. So it is a very popular subspecialty. And so we have at any one time about 20 odd trainees in London who are pursuing subspecialty training. It's also increasingly, and we're quite pleased about this, a subspecialty that's now opening up to research. So we've just had our first academic clinical lecturer, James, he would mind me saying that, this year, and we are going to have more. And a lot of our subspecialty trainees are actually out on OOP pursuing higher degrees. So it is a specialty that lends itself to research. It's also a specialty that lends itself very well to flexible training, to less than full-time training, because I know there have been a few questions about that. And actually we do encourage our trainees to go less than full-time if it works for them. So it is a quite an exciting training program that covers 9 training centres across London. We do also have joint rotational programs with some of our partner deaneries, East of England, Thames Valley sometimes, KSS, and perhaps there will be more as time goes on, as people try to sort of get access to some of the subspecialty training opportunities that we have in London. So that's sort of the bulk of the program is 24 months perinatology, and Morag will probably talk about that. But there is ample opportunity to do not just out of program, but to do allied subspecialty training, so neurology, palliative care, neurodevelopmental pediatrics. We do try and get all our trainees through a 6-month post, not necessarily full-time equivalent, with NTS, just to get some transport experience. And the GOSH post, I should just point out, is not part of the core 24-month perinatology mandatory requirement for training. So it will be in addition, and it will, at the moment, we don't have it as a training post, so it will be done as an UPT. So it is part of training, but does not yet have a training number attached to it. So at the moment, trainees will have to go through a kind of nominal process and be appointed into a fellow post, but that fellow post will count for training. So we've ratified it as a training centre. Morag has kindly done that over the past year, and we've had 2 trainees go through successfully, and we do have the job description. So I would urge all of you who are applying to the London, well, to the GRID, sorry, to the subspecialty training program, because it's not just only about London, it's a national training program. So I would urge you to look at the job descriptions, because training centres have been asked to draw up their job descriptions, ensuring that they're meeting the curricular requirements set by CSAC, but also the other mandatory requirements, generic requirements for training. And they give you things like off the rota, and so you get an idea of what the job is like. And as I kind of had to call myself subspecialty TPD. There's a bit of a mouthful. So if anyone can think of an acronym where neonatologists love 3-letter acronyms, you know, RDS, CLD, PDA. So if you can think of something that's 3-letter that we can use, please do. Any clever answers in the chat, please. What I find is a lot of times trainees haven't read the job descriptions, and so when they then get successful with the training program, with the GRID, sorry, subspecialty recruitment program, they then start asking questions that they should really probably have looked at, and all that information will be on the website. We should actually put into the chat the link from yesterday's talk, and I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but you know, the college has got very clear, I downloaded it actually myself yesterday. At the moment, the job descriptions are not out. They won't be out until sometime in October, I think the 15th or so of October. But when they do, please just have a look at the job descriptions for the areas that you are going to preference, that you want to be able to, you want to go and do your subspecialty training. Like I said, it's not just a London training program, and we do encourage trainees to move regions if they can. But we understand that many of us have got settled in one area and might find that a little bit difficult. So I think that's what I'm going to say about the program, and then I just want to talk a little bit about shaper training. Is that, if that's okay? There will be ample opportunities for questions, but we know what shaper training is. It's the biggest shake-up of training of pediatric, in fact, not just pediatrics, but postgraduate training, medical training, since modernizing medical careers. And most of you, I think, are too young to remember or have been around during MMC. So we had the Kalman movement, then we had MMC, and now then we had sort of Progress, which was the curriculum that came in that was sort of preparing us for this. And Shaper Training Care has come about because we want to concentrate training and get rid of areas of aspects of training that are not necessarily required, and looking very clearly at the curriculum and our trainees through the years. It's quite clear that our training program is very long. It's 8 years, and that actually can be done in a little shorter period. And a lot of our trainees actually accelerate the training anyway. So that's telling us that the training program can be shorter. And we then moved to, as you know, because all of you are now on the progress curriculum at the moment, to a curriculum that has emphasis on the very core areas of practicing medicine, like communication and safeguarding and all of that, those generic skills, and then having the specialties and subspecialties competencies and capabilities built on that foundation. And it's just moving that along with Progress Plus, really. And so what the college is saying is the college, Progress Plus, which is the curriculum for Shaper Training, will offer, it will deliver good training whilst allowing a little bit more flexibility. So we, instead of having a 3-stage program now, we're going to have a 2-stage program. So at the moment, we've got level 1, level 2, and level 3 training. I don't know if you can put up the slide, Morag, for me, that would be helpful. And there's sort of 3 aspects really that we will be concentrating on with Progress Plus and Shaper Training. And it's looking at developing better skills, so the foundational skills as well as the specialty skills, looking at attitudes as well, and how we practice medicine, and also working better with our allied healthcare professional colleagues. So we're going to move from a 3-stage. So level 1 at the moment is 3 years, as we know, indicative, whole time equivalent. Everything is indicative because trainees can accelerate their training if they achieve the capabilities and competencies in a shorter period of time. And some trainees might need longer. And I think we need to accept that for whatever reason.
Is that sharing or not?
It's not. It says you started, but we can't see anything.
Right, okay.
And then you've got level 1 at the moment is sort of where you build on your experience in general, community and neonatal pediatrics and get your exams. And then level 2, where you step up to being a middle grade, a registrar in a DDH. That's a 2-year program that rotates through general pediatrics, neonates, and community. And then level 3, which is subspecialty training, where you can be a general pediatrician or general pediatrician with an interest, or subspecialty, trained to be a subspecialty pediatrician. And Shaper Training is now going to be implemented in 2023. We've been talking about it now for probably about 4, 5, 6 years. So instead of 3 tiers, we've got 2 tiers, and we no longer have levels. We now have core pediatrics and specialty pediatrics. So the first thing to say is that specialty pediatrics isn't changing. So where the changes are is in the core pediatric section. So that's where the year is going to be taken out of to make the program a 7-year training program rather than an 8-year training program. And if you like, what we're doing is we're taking off 6 months from what is the current level 1. So what we're saying now is that we would hope that quite a lot of our ST3 trainees in the second half of ST3 will step up and start to be on the middle grade rota if they're deemed to be capable and competent to do so. And then we've taken kind of 6 months away from what was level 2, such that you've lost a year and you have it all condensed in 4 years. So there will be some trainees at ST3 that will be transitioning to middle grade, and at ST4 you're on the middle grade rota. In core pediatrics, you would have to have gone through and achieved the curricular capabilities in general pediatrics, neonatology, community child health. Now, we are still working on how you're going to get capabilities, or how trainees will get capabilities in things like integrated healthcare and public health. But we are going to have a lot of emphasis on what the trainee can do and what their capabilities are. And so really working very hard with educational supervisors to understand when trainees can step up. And then you have ST4 trainees who will be on the middle grade rota. And so the difference now is that you will be applying for subspecialty training in ST4. So currently, some trainees do if they're going to accelerate their training, but most trainees will apply for subspecialty training at ST5. Trainees can apply for subspecialty training at any time, as long as they've got enough indicative time left in their training program. So some training programs are 2 years in duration, like nephrology, for instance. But our neonatal subspecialty training program is 3 years. So the only way that you can apply for neonatal subspecialty training beyond ST5 is if you are in a approved post, a post that's approved for subspecialty training, and that has to be ratified by the CSAC before you can be eligible to train as a neonatal subspecialty trainee. So there will be some ST4 on the trainees on the call today on this webinar. And we are going to really have to focus on our ST4 trainees, because if you want to apply to the neonatal subspecialty, we need to do two things. We need to ensure that you are on track to have developed and attained the capabilities for the current level 2. And so you can step up to specialty pediatrics. And we need to kind of do that pretty quickly, because the application for this year's subspecialty training will open soon. So what we are going to be doing for London ST4, current ST4 trainees, is allocating, we've got a list of all ST4 trainees who are currently in program. So not those that are on maternity leave or out of program, but those who are currently in program, we will be allocating to 2 pairs of TPDs who will contact you. We, in the first instance, will encourage you to have a sit-down, thorough discussion with your educational supervisors about where you are in terms of not just capabilities, but maturity and resilience, because subspecialty training is tough. Neonatal subspecialty training is exciting. I've wanted to look after babies since I stepped into a special care baby unit in Nigeria when I was a medical student. But there's no doubt that it's tough and it's not for everyone. And you really got to make sure that as much as you might love neonatology, neonatology loves you back, but also that you've got the skills and the attitudes and the well-being to be able to cope with the rigors of that. And your educational supervisor might be someone that you can sit down with and talk through that. Or you might want to talk to a friend or a colleague who's already doing subspecialty training, and obviously CSAC advisors as well will be there to support you. But I think it's really important to have a very focused, honest discussion about whether it's the right thing to do to lock up the year, because you've got the option to stay on and do ST5 as you would have, or to accelerate or move into Progress Plus curriculum and Shaper training in September 2023 and apply for subspecialty training with this round. And there's not very much time to decide this, and this is why we're such a big school. In other smaller schools, they're able to see the trainees on a one-to-one, but there's so many trainees, but we have a lot of TPDs, so we've decided to use our TPDs that way, to kind of just be able to have, once you've had the discussion with the education supervisor, then you can get a little bit more discussion. What about your ARCP? Do you want to do a winter ARCP? What's the best thing to do, etc., etc.? Do you want to go out of program? That kind of discussion. Because like I said, it would change for those of you who are already in ST5. The rules are current, as they have always been. Okay, so that's really it for Shaper training. As far as the logistics of application, I'm just going to bring up the college. So some of you have already downloaded this. I know because I've already got emails asking for eligibility forms to be signed off. So I think some of you are already ahead of the curve, which is fantastic, but a lot of work for me. So there is a timetable now for this year's recruitment. The program is to be advertised on the 12th of October on the RSPCH website. Applications will open on the 26th of October. There is a lot of information about eligibility, and I think you really got to look through and make sure that, and if there are any concerns or queries about your eligibility, then your TPD is the person to speak to. Well, actually, you can email me. My email address is on the college website as a contact for London. And I will endeavour to get back to you, but I'm expecting to have over 150 emails, so bear with me. So applications will open on the 26th of October. Eligibility form. So it's not just that you fulfill the eligibility criteria you think you do. I, on behalf of the London School of Pediatrics, will have to ratify that. And who is eligible? Well, you are eligible to go into subspecialty training as long as you have completed core training. And that's the current core training, because of course, Shaper training doesn't come into September 2023. So you will have to have fulfilled what is the current level 2, or be on track to have fulfilled current level 2 curricular requirements by the time you start your subspecialty training, which is September in London. It's the first Monday in September. Other regions might be August. So that's a key eligibility criteria. So if you haven't already moved into ST5, particularly if you're ST4, then we will need more information from your educational supervisor and from you to ensure, and we will look at your e-portfolio to ensure that you are on track, because it'll be a nightmare to have gone through the interview process, get given a job, and someone says you're not ready to step up to subspecialty, to specialty training in September. You'll have to have full membership. I will say that because we were using COVID modified requirements for the last few years, full membership has not been a mandatory criteria to move from ST3 to ST4 as it used to be. So we do have registrar, middle grade, ST4 trainees who do not yet have their clinical exam, and they must have a clinical exam, which means that I need to have seen that you have passed the clinical exam by the time your eligibility form is in, because we can't, unfortunately, use a crystal ball. You might have, you're planning to do it in February, and we would definitely wish you the best and hope that you get the exam, but we can't do it. We can't, allow you to apply this year because, again, what happens if you couldn't take the exam because you were ill, or, something happens and you don't pass the exam, then that would be really quite difficult. So you will have to be a UK trainee in a bona fide training program in the UK or Republic of Ireland. And I've just talked about completion of level 2 training, and also that you have to have full membership. There is no limit to the number of times now that you can apply, but the college have brought in a rule a couple of years ago. The first year there was a kind of what's the word when they give you a pass, really? But from last year, you can only count 12 months prior subspecialty experience, which means that if you're an ST6, presumably you would be in a neonatal subspecialty post, because that's the only way you can apply. But you can't then apply this year if you're continuing on in training, if that makes sense, unless you're less than full-time. Because if you acquire more than 12 months, then you become ineligible. We can talk a little bit more about that, because I think there will be questions about that. And there are things that we encourage you to do, like I'm calling it stop the clock. by going out of program or etc. Maybe even having a baby. Don't say I said that. You're recording this. This is scratch that. But stopping the clock, whichever way, stepping off the training treadmill for a period of time, so that you do not make yourself ineligible. So the forms are now, instead of emailing them, you complete them now on Kaizen. This is fantastic. Kaizen is becoming it for everything now. So you will have to complete the first part. So the same way as you bring up an educational supervisor trainer's report, you bring it up, you click the new event, it will come up, you fill in the first part, and then it says, who do you want to send it to? And for London trainees, it's myself. So you send it to my HEE email address, and then I complete it, and we will confirm that by the 7th of November. And then applications will close on the 16th of November. There'll be shortlisting until the 7th of December. And then you start to get invitations to interviews from the Wednesday, the 14th of December, with a virtual subspecialty interview period between the 19th of January and the 3rd of February next year. So last year, the college decided to push forward the process. It used to be, usually by December, everything would be all sorted out. But it was decided it was a better idea to push it forward. And I think actually it works better. Deadline for confirmation of preference choices is the 3rd of February. And then you start to know offers from the 14th of February. For those of you who've recently applied into pediatrics, it's kind of like the same way you did through Oriel. And then there will be a clearing round, just as we do for pediatric recruitment. And then by the 24th or so of February, most of you will know if you're successful. I think that's where I'll stop here. And then, yeah, Morag will take over. And then I can answer questions after Morag has had her presentation. Is that all right?
Thank you, Anne. That's fantastic. I will just say that there has been 2 suggestions for your 3-letter acronym, one of which has got 4 letters. There is Katie McKinnon's WLB, which is We Love Babies. And
we do love babies.
Yes, we do love babies. It is a requirement for the job. And Hanny's suggestion of NEST, Neonatal Subspecialty Training. I quite like that.
Oh, I like that one. I mean, people like Saeed Mohinuddin might complain because of their NEST course, but I think we're going to claim that one, actually. I'll see what Morag thinks.
So thank you very much, Anne. I will hand over to Morag and we will bank any questions for the end, I think. Over to you, Morag.
Okay, thanks, Callie. I'll just share my screen if I can. Okay, so that should be showing now. Let me go to. So as Callie said, I'm Morag Campbell. I'm a neonatologist who's based in Glasgow, and I'm the chair of the Neonatal CSAC. So Neonatal CSAC effectively oversee the recruitment and interview process for Neonatal Grid, and in addition, provide sort of oversight in terms of neonatal training.
Can everybody see Morag's slides? Because I can't yet. Yep, good. Sorry, Morag, for the interruption.
Okay. So I'm going to take you through some things that I think it's important for you to stop and consider when you're going through the process of applying for neonatal subspecialty training. I know from the survey that Eva did beforehand that you're all at various levels of training between, I think, about ST3 up to ST6. So it's called a subspecialty training program. The training program is 36 months in duration. And the training program, as Anne's already alluded to, contains 24 months of core neonatology. So neonatology within the standard tertiary neonatal unit. And over the course of the training, within the higher specialty training, trainees can consider undertaking up to 12 months, so 2 6 months attachment to an allied specialty. And Anne's already described some of the ones in London in terms of neonatal transport, neonates at Great Ormond Street, but it also might be 6 months in terms of neurology, 6 months ICU, or 6 months cardiology. I think the really important thing is to recognise that it's highly competitive, the application process. Anne's already commented that your minimum requirements, you must have your level 2 competencies signed off. For those of you who are currently ST4 and looking to apply, your TPD and the deanery must be assured that you're going to achieve those. You need to have the approval form completed by the identified individual who's a TPD within the deanery. And if you're currently an ST6, you need to be in a post that would be recognised to contribute to a neonatal grid training programme, and you need prospective approval from CSAC for that post, these posts for ST6 to be recognised. If you're applying, you must have 24 months of training time from the start of grid. So for people considering applying this year, that means you need to have 24 months of training time available from August, September of 2023. People often worry that grid is for people who've got loads and loads of experience. In reality, it's designed for people who are standardly applying at ST5, who this year we've now, with the incoming Progress Plus from next summer, we're going to have people applying at ST4. I think for anybody who's applying for grid, the process needs work. The system on the form and the point system that's been there has been changed over the past few years. And rather than academic trainees automatically getting incredibly high scores because of the input in terms of research and publications, there's now a much more balanced allocation of points across the board. I think for anybody applying, it's really important that you seek some support and input for somebody who's familiar with the process. And as has already been mentioned, a change introduced last year is that we can only recognise prospectively 12 months of higher specialty neonatal training to contribute towards your training program. The college have removed the number of applications you can have, so there's not a number limit on it, but there is a training time limit. So if somebody currently is ST6 and applied this year and was unsuccessful at shortlisting, then you need to start thinking very early on after being unsuccessful about conversations within your deanery as to whether, as Anne said, you can put a pause on your training and either step out to do an UPP, an UPE, and apply again the next year, or consider whether actually it's the right thing for you or not. In terms of starting points for applying for a grid, I've got these 2 documents that you can download from the RCPCH website. One is the neonatal medicine syllabus, and I think it's useful to know what grid training is all about and what skills and competencies you're expected to develop. The document on the left-hand side of the slide gives you the timetable that Anne's already alluded to. And it's really important that anybody who's applying has that document and has read it inside out. The domains that are assessed in terms of the application form are clinical experience, audit and QI, research and publications, management and leadership, education, and a supporting statement for your application. So there is actually a balanced allocation of points. So there are many areas that people who may not have much in the way of research or publications may well have developed some skills and competencies in. This sheet just shows you the time frame that Anne's already commented. But the bottom line is early on in October, the 12th of October, you'll be able to look at the various programmes and the jobs that are currently going to be advertised for part of this year's recruitment window. The Opening of the forms is on the 26th of October, and applications are closing on the 16th of November. And you will hear in terms of shortlisting before Christmas. So in terms of the basics, if you're going to look at grid, I think that it needs a serious amount of work. And I think those of you who are currently at ST3 or some of the ST4s who may not be thinking about applying this year, actually you can start now in terms of your preparation. You want to have a look at your CV and compare it across the assessment domains using the document that I've shown on the previous slide. And you want to use it to identify your own gaps. Use it as an opportunity to stop and think, what can you develop? How can you sort of narrow those gaps down and develop and evidence some of the skills and capabilities they're looking for? You need to start well in advance, and you also need to be very realistic. It's very important to acknowledge that people are not going to, if you're going to be applying in this window, if you don't have 5 peer-reviewed publications, a PhD, an MD, and all kinds of things, they're not going to be created in the next 4 weeks. So it's about thinking about where you put your focus. Ask for input within your department and use the feedback you get from people to develop the strength of your application. People genuinely want to help trainees who are applying for grid. So if somebody's making suggestions, then it's important to stop and reflect on that. If you're asking people for help and input, it's important that you get somebody who's going to give you very honest feedback. So you want to be putting in the best, not something that somebody says, oh, that looks okay. And above all, you need to be honest and objective. I think going through the form and its criteria and being honest as to what you think you're actually going to get in the way of points, as opposed to hoping that they're going to go for the higher number. So in terms of the application that you're going to fill out, it's important to get guidance from people, but actually it needs to be you who fills out the form. Don't copy what somebody else has put in. We look at many, many forms, but it's amazing how something is exactly the same as another application's form, how it automatically rings bells, and we will pick these things up. Ensure you answer the question that's asked, because that's what's going to allow you to gain points. Don't just put stuff in because you think it sounds good. If it doesn't actually answer the question, it's not going to give you additional points. And if you're completing the form, make sure you're doing it with the assessment criteria with you, so you can see how you're mapping to the assessment criteria. It's very helpful to look to sort of your supervisors and consultants who are experienced in supporting individuals with grid applications. And indeed, if you're on a unit and there's somebody who's an ST8 there, who's got personal experience and may well be very helpful to talk to. It's important to be open to constructive feedback. I think people genuinely are trying to help and support you, even though it feels like somebody's suggesting that you're going to score lower than you would like to. The whole process is highly competitive, so you really do want to be submitting your best self when you put the form in. I think for trainees, it's really important to recognise that on an individual level, not all domains are equal. And by that, I mean there are differential points across domains, but also there's some domains that even if you spend hours and hours and hours working on the content of that domain, you're never really going to increase your point score. So it's important that you focus your energies where it's easiest for you to improve your scores. The key domains, to my mind, where people can really focus their energies are the initial clinical one, which is the one that has a score of 6 associated with it, the audit and QI domain, education domain, and the supporting statement. The supporting statement, I think, is incredibly important because that's your calling card. And for people like me who are going through maybe 100, 120 applications, you want a supporting statement that's going to make me stop and think. And I will read it, and I will read your passion for neonatal medicine. You'll be telling me why you want to do it, what you've done to develop yourself. And when I sit there and read it and think, I'd really like them to be working in my unit, then actually you're going to get very good points associated with it. As I've already mentioned, it's difficult to increase your points in research and publications. And it's important to acknowledge that a lot of trainees who apply for neonatal subspecialty training and are successful will only be scoring maybe 1s, 2s, and if they're very lucky, they'll be scoring 3 in Math and AIM. So don't worry if you think you're sitting at a 2. This is just a little bit showing you the clinical experience question. So it asks a very specific question. It asks you to describe your clinical experience, debate the skills you've acquired in acute emergency and non-acute settings that are significant and specific to your subspecialty application, including details of transferable skills and your overall approach to patient care. So just picking up, what gives you a 1 is if you've only given a generic description of your training so far. It's not specifically related to neonates, and there's no attempt to explain the relevance of skills. But actually, to get 6, you need to be giving specific examples, giving significant examples of skills you've gained, and how they're relevant to the subspecialty, how it's relevant to your development, and that you're clearly showing that you're patient-centered. So, as I said, when you're writing about clinical experience, you need to think about those items and are you mapping to that or not. Audit and QI, I already alluded to, is an incredibly important domain, and it's one that individuals who perhaps aren't applying this year, but thinking about next year, should start to think about looking at the scoring associated with 4 marks. Do I have audit and QI projects that I've been involved in designing and leading? Am I able to describe clearly what changes happened in practice within the unit or changes in guidelines that have been adopted, at least for one of them, at a regional or even potentially a national level? Education is a 3-point domain, but there's also an additional point if somebody has got specific training in education. That is, they've done a GIC course, they've done a Teach the Teachers or Train the Trainers course, or they've got a diploma in postgraduate education or a degree in postgraduate medical education. And again, the nuances are in terms of, have you been delivering regional teaching, or were you the person who actually designed the program and in addition contributed to delivering it? Statement of support, as said, this is your calling card. This is you showing us in your descriptive paragraph what it is that inspires you about neonatal medicine, how you've demonstrated your commitment to it, and how over the course of your training you've taken opportunities to enhance your own skill sets to make you, to shape you into somebody who could be a neonatologist in the future. So we want excellent descriptions of motivation, your experience, showing your in-depth understanding and commitment to the subspecialty, and also potentially talking about a career path. But I would caution that describe by putting in a statement to support, saying that you're going to be a neonatologist with a special interest in hemodynamics, that actually doesn't have evidence that supports that you've already on that track or acquiring those skills. So I think be careful that you're not putting yourself into a box that is very niche without a whole variety of skills to back up the reason that you're saying you want to do that particular aspect of neonatal medicine. So what about the competition, which most people really want to know about? So generally we tend to sit at about 100 applications. On the right-hand side of the slide is the data from actually last year's recruitment. So we had a total of 106 applications, 102 of them longlisted. So 4 of them did not fulfill the criteria for applying for GRID. Out of that long list of 102, we shortlisted 65 individuals and interviewed them. At interview, 50 people were appointable, and there were 36 posts filled. So while the competition feels, for those of you who are sitting there just now contemplating filling out the form, that it's all about people like me looking at your form, and deciding whether I think that merits 3 or perhaps even a 4 in terms of that specific domain. Part of the real competition is actually your fellow applicants. So what about post-fill rates? Well, these are the post-fill rates for the regions across England and the developed nations. And you can see everywhere we have 100% fill rate, apart from one rotation, and that's because somebody had to withdraw at the last moment and we weren't able to offer it elsewhere. So we sat with 36 posts, 37 posts, of which we filled 36 of them. And we had 50 appointable. And so what we do in neonates, because we know we will have more candidates that are appointable than we have posts, is that we're on a clearing round. So we will offer posts to individuals that they might not necessarily have considered, but actually it may be their opportunity to undertake neonatal subspecialty training and ultimately end up with a CCT in neonatal medicine. I think thinking about clearing and clearing offers is particularly relevant if individuals are applying at ST6 and haven't scored high enough to be offered their own identified choices. So I've mentioned that it's highly competitive, and that means that some people are going to be unsuccessful. So I think the first thing I'd say is actually give yourself time to deal with being disappointed, and whether that's disappointment of not being shortlisted or disappointment of not being successful at the interview. I think you need to look at the feedback. So in terms of the application form, you need to look at the scores you've actually got. And in terms of the interview, look at the feedback and the comments that have been made. Those of us in CSAC are very happy to discuss applications that have been unsuccessful with individuals. I know that I tend to spend a significant proportion of time, which I usually do sort of February and March every year, where I will meet up on teams with individuals who have not been successful and look at their forms and the scores, and we'll discuss what opportunities would they have to develop themselves and put forward a more successful application for the future. I think for people who are at a point, whether it's somebody in ST6 just now, or potentially somebody who's applying in ST4 who's been unsuccessful, then I think it's very important that you're going to speak to your TPD. Anne's already alluded to the fact that in Progress Plus, somebody who's currently in ST4 may opt, if they are unsuccessful at grid application in ST4, to actually remain in core training and do what's the traditional ST5 year, to better prepare yourself to apply again. And for somebody in ST6 currently who's unsuccessful, then you would only be able to apply and have 24 months remaining in training if you were to put a pause in your training. I think when you're unsuccessful, I think it's really important to be open to constructive feedback and use it as an opportunity to shape your next application. I think it's really important to recognize that just because you're unsuccessful on one occasion, it doesn't mean you're going to be unsuccessful in another. And I certainly have had individuals who have applied on ST5 and been unsuccessful, and I've met with them and discussed the content of their application, and they've subsequently gone on, performed incredibly well, and ranked within the top 5 across the UK on their subsequent application. So just because you're unsuccessful once doesn't mean to say that you can't develop and put together an excellent application in the future. So in summary, grid applications take a lot of work. I think the earlier you start preparing, the better. I think it's really useful to benchmark your CV against the domains and scoring criteria. Take advantage of those people who've got experience in the process. There may be a consultant who does a lot of work with grid trainees and supervised people before. There may be senior grid trainees within your unit. Take the opportunity to talk to them and learn from their experiences. And those of us in CSAC are very happy to help. I spend a lot of my time talking to people, certainly from about June onwards, discussing in terms of the process of grid application with them. And I'm always happy to do so when we can find a time that works for both of us. Look at the RCPCH website. There's lots of details there on subspecialty training. The grid program descriptions on the jobs that are going to be advertised will be up there in the next few weeks. You can start looking at the application process if you haven't already done so, and look at the scoring criteria. And there's details there about the post-bill rate. There's also webinars uploaded to the website describing the whole process in terms of grid that was recorded earlier this year in July. Again, I think it's important to mention that the subspecialty 3-year higher specialty training program is not the only way you can develop your career and your skills in neonatal medicine. There is neonatal SPIN. The window, I know, has been closed as we've revised the curriculum, but we are hopeful that will be back up with the new curriculum by November of this year. My email is there, and it's also up on the college website, and I'm happy for people to contact me directly. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Morag. And fantastic that, I mean, that, you know, you spend so much time giving feedback on forms after unsuccessful applications, because it's really key, isn't it? And it's not straightforward or intuitive always to know how to fill those forms. So seeking advice is really crucial.
I think that's really incredibly important, because sometimes when you're filling out the form, you think that you need to talk about something, and you can think that you've put in a really good description, you know, when you're thinking about the supporting statement that's describing your commitment to neonates, but it's often quite easy to go off track with that. And I think on an individual basis, one's not necessarily going to realise when you've gone off track. So I think really taking, as I said, can't emphasise enough that just because you're unsuccessful once doesn't mean to say you're not going to be successful in the future. And I think often the deal breaker with being successful after a disappointment is actually seeking out help and getting somebody who really understands the system to honestly talk through why you've got those marks and how you could potentially think about developing, what other things could you possibly take on that's going to give you more marks in that domain. And sometimes trainees get a bit tied up in the research and publications domain, while in reality, the domains where you can often make a significant difference are thinking about the audit QI, it's thinking about the education, you know, if you're doing NLS and you get IP, then get yourself booked on a GIC course, because that's automatically giving you +1. If you're not up for NLS for a while, then actually there's a train the trainers course on. Go off and do that. You put yourself forward to do various roles within your neonatal unit. When everybody hears the heart think that we want somebody to organise the weekly perinatal morbidity meeting, allocate the speakers, ensure people have presentations available, you know, that's a leadership role. And there is a purpose in doing it. And actually, sometimes it's those conversations, as I said, when people have with me where they've not thought of things, that people can suddenly see what opportunities they have and how they can look at developing themselves.
Wonderful, thank you. And we're hoping to do another session where we can kind of dig into that a little bit more and give people the opportunity to ask specifically about the application process in that form. But it's been really helpful to look at the scores as well, and I think how the scores is constructed. But I think it probably segues us quite well into what Jess is going to talk about. So I'm going to hand over to Eva to introduce Jess, and then we'll hear a trainee's perspective.
Thanks, Jess, for being here tonight. I think it's so important for us to hear your approach to the whole system, particularly how you've strategized around it. You are an ST6 grid trainee, and you're currently an out of program doing a bit of editorial work with the BMJ, if I'm correct. And you've got quite a bit of research experience and a breadth of other things behind your belt. So thank you for sharing what you've done.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you so much for having me tonight. It's amazing to see how many people are on the call and hopefully some future colleagues out there. So I hope tonight will give you a good perspective from the trainee application point of view. And I'm going to mostly be talking about a general overview, and then maybe later in another talk about the application form and in a bit more detail. Eva, would you mind going on to the next slide? Thank you. So this is a little bit about me. I think you might need to click. Oh, okay, the slide's blank. Okay, so I did all my postgraduate training in London, and I knew that I was interested in neonates quite early on and also research. So I followed the academic pathway pretty much from university. I've done quite a bit of research in neonatal neurodevelopment and spent some time at the Centre for the Developing Brain at Tommy's. But based on the questions that you guys have submitted, you probably want to know a bit about my application process. So I applied for subspecialty training during ST5 in 2020, so not last year, the year before. It was my first attempt and I only applied to neonates. And I was quite specific in the programs that I ranked. I was less than full-time when I applied because I was doing some research and I had a baby. And so I had to fast track my level 2 training to make sure it was all in sync for grid applications. And then I started ST6 in September 2021 at King's. And then after that went on OOP this year in March. And I'm currently working at the BMJ as a clinical editor, which is fantastic, but I'm missing my clinical and research work a lot, but we can talk about that another time if people are interested. So although the application was slightly different when I applied, I'm going to try and tailor this so it's relevant to you. This was how I prepared. First of all, spending quite a lot of time thinking about whether I wanted to apply. Check I met the long listing criteria, making sure the paperwork was done at the right time, and then kind of creating a timeline for what I needed to do when, and then using the shortlisting criteria to find the gaps in my CV and make sure that I could maximize my application potential. So I think Morag sort of touched on this just at the end of her talk, but I think what's really important is to really consider whether you want to apply to grid. Oh, yeah, there you go. So a lot of people will be thinking about subspecialty applications and applying for grid and might get swept up in that grid fever. But I think it's really important to take a step back and think about whether it's really right for you, not only in the short term for the sort of 3-year training period, but also in the longer term in terms of your career going forward. So I spoke to quite a lot of grid trainees and also some NICU consultants about their jobs and their career sort of trajectories, the challenges they had and the aspects of the jobs that they found rewarding. Then I also spoke to some trainees that had done SPIN and how the training programs sort of compared, and then went through the different curriculums to see what you would be learning on both of those programs. Some people may be completely convinced that it's just neonates that they want to be applying to. You can be applying to 2 grid programs. So there are some other programs that overlap with neonates. So there's things like neurodisability and PICU, and even some aspects of community overlap a bit with neonates with respect to sort of neurodevelopmental follow-up. What I would say is that if you're considering applying for 2, the application process is incredibly time consuming. So you will have to be quite proactively organized. Okay, next slide. I think we've gone through the long listing criteria in quite a lot of detail already. The most important thing is to make sure that you are completing your level 2 training. And if you're fast tracking like I did, make sure that you get that paperwork in on time. And you also need to get an outcome 1 at ARCP. I think everything else has been covered already. So if we go on to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just a bit more about the paperwork. So I think Anne and Morag have already covered this. The most important thing is that confirmation of eligibility form. There are also some other forms that some other people might be considering submitting. So you can see them all there, but there's special circumstances forms. So if you have either a medical condition or disability where the follow-up location is an absolute requirement, or you're a primary carer for someone with a disability, then you might be eligible for special circumstances. And then the reasonable adjustment for interview is if you have a disability or impairment, which should be taken into account at the time of interview. So only some people will need to submit that those second list of forms. So this is all taken from the RCPCH website, and this has all the relevant information for the deadlines and timeframes. I've found it quite helpful putting it into my own Excel. This isn't a copy of mine, but this is the relevant one for your year. And then I created a column on the other side, sort of putting in what I needed to do and when, so that I knew all the deadlines that I needed to meet. You've probably already seen that timeline, and Morag's gone through that as well. And then the next slide. This is the shortlisting criteria that Morag's also gone through. And what I did was also put this into sort of my own Excel, so you can see the scoring system. And then just in that sort of initial preparation stage, just putting in my examples for what I would potentially talk about for each section, and giving myself a realistic expectation of where I would be scoring. And then at this stage, kind of getting an idea of where those gaps in my CV were and how I could maximize the points. So when I applied, the form was different. So now you've got 2 more points available for clinical experience, 2 less for research, 1 less for education, and the statement is out of 4 rather than 5. So they do vary year on year. So don't be too disappointed if you completely map your CV to an old one and then it gets updated. Try and use the current shortlisting criteria score. Okay, so the next steps, this is probably the bits that are more of the trainee perspective. So the application forms, when I applied, they didn't tend to vary that much year by year. So you can think ahead of time how you're going to answer each question. And actually the window for when you're applying is so short and the forms take so long to fill out that it's actually quite useful to have a look at those questions and have a think about how you would answer them. Then talking to peers and colleagues that you'd like to support you. I didn't really want too many people involved in the written part of the application. So I just had one previous grid trainee who sort of proofread my application and just corrected some grammar and any sort of obvious errors. But I was quite nervous about the interview. So I sort of asked a couple of people to do mock interviews, including my local DGH consultant in neonates and a consultant from my old tertiary centre. Everyone's going to be different and is going to want different support, but it's quite nice having perspectives from different people, maybe from different units, and in tertiary and district generals, and maybe even a previous grid trainee. Sometimes the feedback can be a bit overwhelming. So if you're quite stressed near the time of interviews and the advice is conflicting, then that might be a disadvantage for some people. So just think carefully about who you actually want to support you. I would say that the application takes a long time, so plan ahead and make sure that your rota allows the time for the application process, and that if you hopefully get an interview, that you will have some time around that period to prepare. There are differing number of places across the country, and so rather than deciding in the heat of the moment where you're going to be applying and where you're willing to move, maybe it's worth having a chat with sort of your family or your other half and think about where in the country you're willing to move, and also having a look at those training programs specifically in each region to see which one you would particularly like to apply to. I was not in a tertiary neonatal job when I applied. I was in a community job or maybe in a general pediatric job, and I hadn't done tertiary neonates for a while. So I think now, particularly if you're not in a neonatal job, it's quite a good time to start building up clinical knowledge and resources. Just sort of trying to do a little bit of revision. So I use the neonatal emergency book, use national and local hospital guidelines. And then it's also just quite a good time to keep up to date with current neonatal advances rather than trying to like cram them in nearer the time. So I read up on sort of the current and the past big research trials, kept my eye out for new publications, new guidelines coming out, looking at any changes in training programs and also NHS structure. I found the BAPM and the RCPCH websites are really good starting points, and also just keeping up to date with journals like ADC and FNN and Milestones is useful. And then I dug out my old ISC interview book to start thinking about potential interview questions. And then coming to these meetings are helpful to keep you up to date. So I hope that's been helpful. I've added some links here, which I found really useful. And you're very welcome to email me if you have specific questions related to the path that I've taken. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was wonderful, and really, really great to have a trainee perspective. I think you were incredibly organised, systematic almost, and I'm sure that fed into your success. And I think both Morag and Anne have alluded to that in their talks as well. So thank you to all three of you for some really valuable information. There's been questions coming up in the chat as we've gone along. But some of them will have been answered as we've gone along. So if there are questions that you posted before and have gone unanswered by the subsequent speakers, can I suggest you post them again now?
So can I just pick up, Callie? There's one question about dealing with the bottleneck of applications happening due to ST4s applying. I think the first thing is that because you're only allowed to have 12 months of training in higher specialty recognised to contribute, prospectively recognised, is that ST7s can't apply this year. We used to previously allow ST7s to apply, but we gave a dispensation last year because there was a sudden change at very short time notice. But anybody, so we'd really only have ST4, ST5 and ST6 applying this year. In general, we tend to have between about 35 and 37 jobs. There's slightly more than that this year. I think there's probably over 40 jobs going to be available. So there is a bit of an uplift this year. But I said, in terms of the total number of applications, I think it'll be up a little bit. I don't think it's going to be hugely up. As I said, we've standardly had about 100 to 106. I think maybe we'll be up about 110, 115. And I think the important thing in terms of thinking about ST4s is that the reality is that if you're an ST4 and you're unsuccessful, then you have the opportunity to stay in core training, which I think is the right thing to do. Or if your deanery are able to support you to do an UP-E that's going to give you more neonatal experience and better prepare you to be competitive the next year. But as I say, being unsuccessful one year doesn't mean to say you're going to be unsuccessful the next. But I think for those in ST4, I think you're the group who's probably most potentially disadvantaged. And so I would strongly recommend that if you're ST4 and you're not successful, is that you don't move through into higher specialty 5, 6, 7. I think if you stay in core, you give yourself an extra go at the crack at the ferry, so you can apply again in your ST5 core year 4 effectively, and then you can apply the following year again. So by staying, you get a potential of 3 applications, while if you moved into higher specialty, then you only will get the 2.
Thanks, Morag. And do you want to respond on that as well for London training?
Yeah, I think, like I said, for the London-based trainees, we are providing specific targeted support for you. So you will be contacted in the next couple of weeks by a pair of TPDs. But I think really you want to start to think about what's right for you, because it's not just, you know, there is no rush in life. I don't think you necessarily need to sort of start to apply now just because you can. Is it right for you? Is it right for your personal circumstances? Because obviously there's a lot that goes on. We're not divorced. Life is not divorced from work and training. Is this the right time for you? You've just heard from Jessica. Jess has just gone on, you know, how much work, and I think she's incredibly focused and organized. But I do think that you know, significant number of trainees who apply for substitute training need to be. So there's a lot of work. And that's alongside work that's going on, your normal training, and then what else is happening at home and in your life. So really thinking about, you know, is this really the right time for me? And do I have the resilience to cope with all of this? Given that you do have a lot more options, actually. So just because a new option has come up, the college is not trying to encourage ST4 trainees to rush into specialty training, either to be a general pediatrician or substitute pediatrician. It's only if it's right for you. So I think we really want to ensure that it is. Jonathan Round, who's our head of school, always kind of says you can accelerate your training, but it's quite difficult to go back. And so, you know, there is no rush at all. And you might give yourself more options. You know, you can actually come off because you're doing really well and do an OOP. Go and go to another region, maybe go to Australia, you know, do a QI fellow, an education fellow, do a cardiology OOP. We've just done the OOP panel today, and pretty much, I would say 99% of applicants, we approved the application. So we're very positive, and the college wants us to be with OOPs. Very liberal, as long as you're following the, you know, the guidelines set by the GMC Gold Guide. So I do think it's important. And I also think, you know, just through one of the questions on the chat, Jess alluded to that. We said that you have to have completed your level 2 training by the time you start specialty training in substitute training in August, September next year. There are only 2 circumstances that you can defer your start if you're successful, and that's statutory leave, which is parental leave, or long-term sickness. So you're on statutory leave, you're on long-term sick, off sick, or on maternity leave, or if you are currently engaged with an OOP leading to a higher degree. So usually a PhD could be an MD res. No other situations will you have your training deferred. So it's really important to think about that as well, because there have been a few questions on the chat. So if you're going to go out of program, there was a question about going out of program, not getting an outcome 1. How are you going to have your level 2 training signed off by August 2023 if you're not in program? So you have to have completed it before you go out of program. You should have an ARCP. We run ARCP twice a year. So there's a winter round. We've just fixed the dates yesterday, towards the end of January. So you do need to have either an outcome 1 or an anticipated outcome 1. You will have to have an ARCP that has signed you off for an outcome 1. And yes, we can decline your eligibility if we do not see that there's good evidence that you will be eligible. Because it will be a disaster, mini disaster. It's so competitive to give a post to a trainee who then can't take it up because they have not completed the essential criteria.
I think Anne's point about not being in any rush is incredibly important. You know, if you're ST4, you don't need to apply this year. You know, think about the opportunities to enhance your training, and, you know, if you don't think it's time for you, then you wait until next year.
We do have some trainees that say, you know, I just want to see what the experience is like. And you can actually go through the application process without actually submitting it. So you can actually score yourself and think, well, you know, maybe sit down with an education supervisor, neonatal, senior neonatal colleague like Jess and say, well, there's my scores, what do you think? And and then actually, how can I, it's the same way as you prepare for SIs and things like that, because you may not necessarily be given an SI to do as a trainee, but you can do a mock one. They can give you a real life one, and you can do the answer, you can deal the SI and then actually look at what actually was submitted and compare without putting yourself through the stress of doing that. But it's fine, you can do that. But are you the sort of trainee? And I said that, I think Emma, I might have said that to you when we had our meeting. If you can cope with the disappointment, that's fine. But how many of us, we get knocked back and we take it personally, and we, if you can't cope with the knockback, because that might be the first time that you've actually had a knockback in your entire training and medical school, because you're high flyer, high achiever. If you can't cope with that disappointment, then why bother? But if you think, I'm just really going in it just to kind of see how it's like, and if I get an interview, I'll wing it and see, that's fine. But there is no rush, really. And as we get to the tail end of our careers, and I can say that because I've been a consultant for 20 years, I'm realizing just every day just how much there's just no rush. I'm so glad that I took 2 years out of program.
I was 13 years, I think, as a registrar, and I never regretted it. Absolutely. I've got a really good Samuel Beckett quote that talks to that, which is, I'm sure many of you know, and I say to trainees all the time, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And I think, honestly, it's a route to success. If don't be scared of failing, because you learn so much when you fail at something. And it is often I think the center of your success next time because of that experience. So yeah, absolutely. We've got probably 5 or 6 minutes late, and we've taken up lots of people's evenings, and we're really grateful for that. Is there any final questions that we haven't covered? There's one here about, is community rotation still mandatory to apply for neonatal subspecialty training?
Well, you do need to have completed level 2 training. So whatever your level 2 training, whatever subspecialty training you're applying for, it doesn't matter whether it's neonatal, PEM, PICO or whatever, you have to have completed the requirements for level 2 training. Now, the college will say that you don't need to have necessarily done a community post, but I don't know how you're going to get the community capabilities without doing a post. So if you can find a way to do that, taking 2 weeks of your leave and going to sit down and, in a community child health center and doing some work and making sure you've got the capabilities, that's fine. But you've got to demonstrate those capabilities outside of the post, and that will be up to you, because your program, your TPD program, your program management TPD is not bound to do that for you. We can offer you a post, but we can't help you get it outside of a post, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I think the last question goes to Hanny, that's just popped up, which is, can I get evidence for my application beyond the last 3 years, or is there a time limit for the evidence that I present? I don't think there's a time limit.
No, there isn't, because if you look at the scores on the bit about research, we give X number of points for research that was part of an undergraduate degree, which is less than what you'd get if you're describing research that you've done recently. But there's no time limit, because the reality is that people who are applying, whether you're ST5, whether you're ST6, may well be using specific examples of things that happened during your ST2 placements that inspired you, involvement with the case. So no, there's absolutely no time limit, but it's about relevance to the subspecialty that you're applying.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Ray has just popped. Oh, you got another question, Eva?
I just wonder if it's worth highlighting Jamie's question also regarding shortlisting score cutoffs. I know that as people plan how much effort they put into their CVs and are looking at the shortlisting scores and trying to estimate where their weaknesses are. I said very clearly that the competition and the rate limiting step was not me, it was your peer group. So there is not a fixed shortlisting score, it changes year to year. We've changed significantly in the past 4 years.
So since I became chair, we changed the number of interviews we held. They only used to be about 44 interviews. We've increased to the 65. I expect this year we'll be about 65 to 70. So in many respects, the shortlisting score has actually dropped down a little bit because we realise that there's people who would be middle of the road in terms of scoring, who may well be excellent individuals and who will perform very well at interview. And ultimately, the shortlisting score is just the step you need to take to get interviewed, because the shortlisting score only is then discarded, and it is the interview score that counts. And the only situation where shortlisting score is brought into play is if there's a tie between individuals, which can't get split by the domains at interview that have been ranked, and then we would use shortlisting score to discriminate. So unfortunately, I can't say that it is 62% or 57% or whatever, because it changes year to year.
You can just get the best you can, maximize your,
Absolutely.
and just because you can only be the best you can be, no matter who your competitor is anyway. And that's why, you know, some of this, as Morak says, we're kind of behind the curve now, because actually, if you haven't got a lot of this stuff together now for this year, then it's not going to happen this year. So yeah, I just wanted to also say that, you know, as we've tried to increase the number of posts, because we anticipate that there might be just a few more applicants, and you know, for some trainees who are going on, who are already on UPALs or going on UPALs, you have to ask yourself if this is the time that you want to apply, because you can defer obviously if you're successful. But I guess it makes no difference, because actually you can apply unlimited numbers of times. But we're putting in 8 posts for London, and we generally have done 4 to 5 over the last 4 or 5 years. So we've increased the number of posts. Yeah, I think generally it's just still going to be a little bit competitive, but really think about whether you're able to move dignities for a period of time. Maximize your chances.
Yeah. Ray has just posted a link for feedback for this session today, if people would like to fill it out. There's a really good question that's just been posted that I think could be the last question, which is around, can you use overseas experience? So for the international medical graduates, and the person that's posted is an ST4 trainee, and this is their first post in the UK, I assume you mean there. Can they use their overseas experience in their application? I assume
absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. It's about using, because actually in your application you're going to describe, you know, your commitment to the specialty, and that may be in your initial country of origin that inspired you in terms of neonatal medicine. It's about using experiences to articulate your learning, to articulate your experience. So whether that's been in the UK, whether that's been in West Africa, whether that's been in the Indian subcontinent, if it's demonstrating your skills, your experience, your learning and your commitment, then absolutely.
Fantastic. I think that probably just leaves to say an enormous thank you to the 3 of you for talking this evening. It's been hugely informative. I've learned a lot, certainly, and I'm sure it's been really well attended. Don't forget that it's being recorded, so it's going to go onto the LSP YouTube channel or wherever it is that these things are posted. Just as we close, I think we've got a flyer to pop up, Eva, for the next session. So we've arranged a repeat session, a second session, and this is part of our survival series. Those of you who've been on our essential and advanced survival courses, about sort of giving a bit more information on writing your training application. And I know Morag has really shone a light on that, and so has Jess, which has been really helpful. But we thought it might be helpful to have a specific session on that nearer to when the application's open. So please do sign up if you're interested in joining. And that will be on Thursday the 13th of October. And we're really grateful to you all for giving up your evenings, because I know that they are very special times to book for families and other things. So thank you very much. Thanks.